She didn't die, but she claimed to see what souls experience the moment after death, not in visions, not in dreams, but through what she called divine fire, a direct immersion into the pain, joy, and purification of purgatory itself. In the 1490s, St. Catherine of Genoa revealed something no one expected, that purgatory isn't punishment, it's love, and that the soul, even in agony, longs to burn. This is dialogue on the Purgatory of Souls, and what it says about your afterlife will leave you changed. We begin not in a dark place, but in a place of quiet mystery, a space between death, heaven, where the soul, unclothed by the body, awakens to something startlingly beautiful and painful all at once. St. Catherine called it the soul's conversion, not the conversion of a sinner to faith, but the conversion of a soul already belonging to God, discovering at last what God truly is, and by contrast, what it truly is not. In her words, purgatory is not a courtroom, nor a prison. There are no flames kindled by wrath, no devils, no sentences handed down from thrones. Instead, there is light, a searing, brilliant, undeniable light, the presence of God Himself. And the soul, standing naked in that radiance, trembles, not from fear, but from love, because now it understands. Catherine begins the dialogue not with descriptions of places or punishments, but with the most essential awakening, the recognition that the soul, even after death, still carries with it the traces of self, that subtle shadow of ego, the remnants of attachment, the dust of earth, however faint, cling like soot. And now, held in the gaze of infinite holiness, the soul sees what it could never have seen before. It isn't rejected, it rejects itself. The purification isn't imposed, it's embraced. St. Catherine describes this as a profound paradox. The soul loves God so entirely, so purely in this state of awareness, that it longs to be cleansed, not because God demands it, but because nothing unclean can bear His nearness. And the soul, tasting even the edges of His glory, aches to be near Him fully. It knows it must burn, but not with the fire of torment, with the fire of truth. Catherine writes of this fire as though it lives inside the soul itself. It is no external flame, no cosmic punishment. It is the soul's own, longing so powerful, so irresistible, that it becomes a purgation more intense than any earthly suffering. The more the soul sees God, the more it sees what it lacks, and the more it sees what it lacks, the more it longs to be made ready. Imagine it. You've passed through death, and instead of silence, you find clarity, not a voice, but a presence. And in that presence, you feel two truths at once: how much you are loved, and how much more deeply you could love if only you were clean. There is no anger from God, only love. But love itself is fire, and it cleanses by nature. And so, Catherine says, the soul enters willingly into purgatory. It doesn't beg to leave. It doesn't resist. In fact, if given the choice between heaven now, unclean, and a deeper burning to be made ready, the soul chooses the fire, because it has seen God, and now it desires nothing else. Catherine writes that no peace is comparable to that of a soul in purgatory, except that of the saints in paradise. And yet, she also says that the pain of the souls in purgatory is greater than any pain that can be felt or imagined in this life. How can this be? Peace and pain? Joy and suffering? This is the mystery Catherine places before us, an insight the world wasn't ready to hear. Perhaps why her words, for centuries, were hidden, silenced, censored. She claims that the calm as a soul in purgatory is more content than any person alive, because it knows it is exactly where it needs to be. No confusion, no distraction, no doubt. Its one desire is purification, and purification is exactly what it receives. But at the same time, its pain is unmatched, because it has glimpsed perfection and must wait for the fullness of it. There's no turning back, there's no going faster, only this sacred, painful, radiant waiting. This is not the purgatory of folklore. This is not the fearful purgatory carved into medieval church walls or whispered in sermons to frighten the masses. Catherine's vision was something deeper, something that touches the core of how we see ourselves. She says the soul begins to see that every imperfection, every choice made from self-love instead of divine love was never just a mistake. It was an obstacle to closeness, a layer of ash between the soul and the light. And in purgatory, the soul sheds that ash, but not by force, by desire. It sheds everything that is, not love. This is the true conversion. The soul, perhaps for the first time, wants nothing of itself. No pride, no identity, no defense. Only to be transparent in the light of God. To be seen entirely, and to be made new. And the more it surrenders, the deeper it burns. The deeper it burns, the nearer it draws. And the nearer it draws, the more alive it becomes. The process is not passive, it is not linear, it is a dance between longing and light. And the light, according to Catherine, never condemns, it only heals. She speaks gently, but with such gravity that it feels as if the very laws of reality are being rewritten. For if purgatory is not punishment but transformation, then death itself is not an ending, it is a beginning. A beginning not marked by judgment, but by truth. Truth that hurts, truth that heals, truth that in the end sets the soul free. Catherine believed this was not just knowledge for the dead, but for the living, that we, even now, can begin this inner purgation, that through surrender, humility, and the slow work of love, we can begin to let the light in, because one day, that light will be all there is, and if her vision is true, we will not be dragged into fire by fear, but walk into it freely, because the fire is love. And love, when it is pure, burns away everything that is not itself. So if you've ever feared the question of what comes after this, life, if you've ever wondered whether you will be enough, clean enough, whole enough to be accepted, Catherine's voice, echoing from the 15th century, offers this answer: you are already loved. And if you are not ready to stand in the fullness of that love, it will wait for you, patiently, radiantly, until your soul longs to burn. This is the beginning of the soul's journey after death. And it is not the end of your story. So the next time you catch yourself fearing what lies beyond, remember this lost teaching from a woman who walked through the fire, not in death but in love, and came back to tell us, purgatory is not where you are punished for not being perfect, it's where you are prepared to become whole, and that is a gift. Yet, there is a moment when the soul, having passed through death, begins to truly see, not with the eyes of the body, but with a clarity it never possessed in life. St. Catherine describes that awakening. Not the kind of awakening that bursts forth in joy or ecstasy, but one that begins in an unbearable stillness, a silence filled with the weight of eternal truths pressing in from all sides. The soul, no longer distracted by the noise of the world, now faces one truth alone, the overwhelming presence of divine love. But here is the paradox, that love, so absolute, so pure, it does not first comfort. It burns. The soul, in its first glimpse of that light, doesn't feel peace, it feels misery. Why? Because the soul finally understands. Understands how far it had lived from what it was made. 4. It sees the chasm between what God is and what it had chosen. And in that light, it can no longer look away, no longer excuse, no longer forget. St. Catherine does not describe this misery as condemnation. There is no divine voice of wrath, no thunder, no rage. Instead, it is the soul itself that trembles and weeps. The soul now knows it is loved, beyond comprehension, and that it has responded with indifference, distraction, and self. The torment is not inflicted upon the soul. The torment rises from within it. The divine love, which never ceased to shine upon it, is now unveiled completely, and in the light of that love, the soul sees not just God, but itself, with terrifying clarity. St. Catherine writes that the soul in this moment feels as though it is submerged in a fire made from two forces, God's perfect goodness and its own failure to love in return. But this is not despair. The fire is not hatred. It is not punishment. It is purification. The soul sees God's love not as something abstract, but as a fire that penetrates every fiber of its being. And in that light, it recognizes every misplaced desire. Every time it turned from the good, every instance it was content with less than truth. There is no longer shame before others, no comparison, no hiding. There is only the soul and God. And yet, despite the agony, the soul does not flee. It does not rebel. It longs for the fire. It welcomes it. St. Catherine tells us this is the most extraordinary part of the soul's experience. It is grateful for the pain, because for the first time it is being made clean. For the first time it truly wants what God wants. And so it embraces the fire, not because it enjoys suffering, but because it now knows that this is what love requires. In life, the soul had excuses. It had distractions. It could turn its face from truth and pretend it hadn't seen. But now, in the presence of the God who is truth, it sees all and knows there is no other way to become what it was meant to be. And so the soul consents to the fire. It lets itself be burned. What St. Catherine makes clear is that this is not a punishment imposed from above. This is the soul's own choice, made in perfect freedom, because when you are finally exposed to pure, perfect, unshakable love, you do not wish to escape. You wish only to be made worthy of it. The misery, then, is not hopelessness. It is the soul's first true understanding of what it was made for and what it has missed. But with that grief comes something else, something infinitely greater, a longing to rise. The soul does not hate itself. It does not spiral into despair. That would be hell. And this is not hell. This is the holy fire of purgation. The soul weeps, yes, but its tears are the tears of a child returning home, ashamed of its dirt, desperate to be clean before running into the arms of its father. This longing, St. Catherine writes, becomes the soul's joy even amid suffering. For now, it knows that every pain it feels is drawing it closer to that embrace. Every purification draws it nearer to the God it now sees with unclouded eyes. Here we begin to understand that purgatory far from being a place of arbitrary suffering, is a place of profound hope. The pain is not cruel. The pain is holy. It strips the soul of every illusion, every attachment, every mask. And it does so not to wound, but to heal. Because God's love is not half-measured. It does not tolerate what is false in us. It cannot. Not because it is harsh, but because it is true. Imagine a sculptor chiseling away the stone to reveal the figure beneath. That is the image St. Catherine offers. A God who will not stop until the soul is radiant, until it reflects his own beauty. And the soul, though trembling, says, "Yes, yes, let it be done to me. There is no pride here, no resistance, only surrender." Because at last the soul understands. It understands that every false comfort it clung to, every praise it chased, every grudge it held, every bitterness it nurtured, was nothing but dust in its mouth. None of it remains now. All of it must go. And the soul wants it to go. That is what changes everything. The soul no longer desires to escape discomfort. It desires to become real. To be filled with God, it must be emptied of all else. And that emptying, painful as it is the beginning of peace. Not the kind of peace the world gives, not the shallow peace of getting what one wants, but the peace of being aligned with the eternal. The soul, even in fire, is at rest, because it finally knows what it is made for. In this chapter, St. Catherine is not writing with the cold logic of a theologian. She is writing from a place beyond words, from a place she describes as direct communion, a knowledge that did not come from books or teachings, but from being consumed in God's presence. And so what she gives us is not a system, but a witness. She shows us what the soul looks like when it begins to awaken to love. Not the sentimental kind, but a love that purifies, a love that requires everything, a love that asks for our whole being and gives us back a self more radiant than we ever imagined. This love does not flatter, it does not bribe, it does not coax, it burns, but it burns to make whole. For those of us still walking through life's noise and chaos, these words may seem distant, but they are not meant to frighten, they are meant to call. Because if this is what awaits the soul in the end, this kind of awakening, this clarity, this holy desire to be pure, then why wait? Why live another moment in a state of half-love? Why settle for less than the fire that heals? St. Catherine's vision is not just for the dead, it is for the living. It is for those whose hearts are restless, those who feel the ache of being disconnected from what is true. And it is for those who need hope, not the shallow kind, but the kind that burns through despair and says, "You were made for more. You were made for love. So let it begin now. Let the soul begin to awaken, not after death, but here, now. Let the fire do its work, not to destroy, but to reveal the beauty hidden beneath the dust of years. Let love purify what fear has twisted. Let the soul begin to see, and in that seeing, be transformed. Because once you have glimpsed the light that St. Catherine speaks of, you will never again settle for the shadows. You were made to burn with a fire that frees, and somewhere beyond the veil, your soul already knows it. Now we begin to sense the mercy of God, not a distant mercy, not a concept, not a doctrine, but a mercy that breathes, that lives, that watches, not from afar, but from within the very fire that purifies. St. Catherine takes us into that realization. She does not speak of mercy as an event, or a gesture, or a single act of forgiveness. She speaks of it as a continuous flow, a boundless stream that surrounds the soul at every moment of its purgation. And it is this mercy that sustains the soul, because left to itself, the soul would collapse under the weight of its own grief, its own recognition of distance from the love it now longs for. But God's mercy is not a response. It is the environment of the soul. It is the very air it breathes in that hidden, burning place. St. Catherine reveals that the soul does not seek to escape its suffering. That much we've come to understand. But here she opens a more tender truth. The soul, even as it suffers, is constantly aware of being held not in judgment, held in mercy. It is not condemned to endure. It is permitted to endure, because that endurance, in the end, is mercy itself. The purifying fire is not opposed to God's compassion. It is born of it. And that too is mercy. To suffer in full knowledge that this suffering is love at work, not vengeance, not retribution, but love, refining and restoring. This is the soul's quiet joy. There is a line in this chapter that drifts almost unnoticed, but lingers long after you've read it. If the soul could find another way, a quicker road to union with God, it would not take it, because mercy, in its fullness, is not a shortcut. It is the long and patient path by which love restores what was wounded. No part of the soul is forgotten, no flaw ignored, no shadow overlooked. And yet, mercy does not humiliate, it does not accuse, it simply enters, it waits, it works. This is where Catherine's vision becomes something that lives not only in the afterlife, but in the present heart. Because what she reveals about the soul beyond death is also true about the soul today. God does not love you in degrees. He does not love you more when you are clean, less when you are broken. His mercy, she tells us, is constant. The same mercy that envelops the soul in purgatory is the mercy extended to the soul in life. The difference is not in God. It is in our awareness. The soul in purgatory knows what it once ignored. It sees the love that was always there. And it marvels, not in despair, but in reverence. It wonders in that place of aching clarity how it ever doubted, how it ever lived as though this mercy were distant, or small, or conditional. Because now it sees that even in its darkest hours, even in its sin, even in its coldest refusals, God's mercy never left. It waited, not with disappointment, but with tenderness. This, St. Catherine says, is the cause of the soul's deep inner peace, even in its fire. It understands, finally, that it has never been hated, never been cast aside, never been forgotten. And so the suffering is not poisoned by bitterness. It is made beautiful by trust. She goes even further. She writes that God's mercy is so complete, so generous, that it does not force healing all at once. The soul is permitted to be transformed at the pace it can bear, not because God is slow, but because his love is considerate. He does not crush the soul with the weight of perfection. He draws it gently, patiently, until every part of it is ready to say yes. And each yes brings light. Each yes brings warmth. Each yes brings the soul closer to the embrace it now longs for above all else. This is not the mercy of the world. It does not excuse. It does not pretend wounds aren't real. It heals completely without bypassing the pain. That too is mercy. To be made whole, through the fire, not despite it, to be loved, not in perfection, but in process. St. Catherine's vision is not sentimental, it is piercing. She sees that the soul, in the mercy of God, becomes both witness and participant in its own restoration. It understands, it consents, it hopes, and this, she writes, is what keeps the soul from despair. Not a promise of escape, but the presence of God within the very process of purification. The soul may burn, but it burns in His arms. It may weep, but it weeps on His shoulder. It may ache, but it aches with full assurance that the ache will end in beauty, in union, in joy. No mercy in this life can compare, because this mercy does not wait to be deserved. It does not calculate, it does not measure. It gives all, always, endlessly. This is the mercy the soul discovers, and in that discovery it is undone, not by wrath, by kindness, so complete, so overwhelming, that the soul has no defense left. It can only surrender, and in surrender it begins to shine. By the end of the chapter, you begin to see why purgatory, in Catherine's telling, is not a dungeon. It is a sanctuary, a place where souls are not imprisoned, but invited, a place where mercy is not delayed, but intensified, a place where the love that once cooled softly now roars with fire, and the soul, instead of fleeing, walks forward into its light, because now it knows, now it sees. This is the heart of everything. And if you've ever felt too far gone, too stained, too lost to return to God, hear this. You are already surrounded by the mercy St. Catherine saw, not in the distant beyond. Here, now. The question is not whether mercy is offered. The question is whether you're willing to let it reach you. Because when it does, when you finally allow it in, it won't scold you, it won't punish, it won't shame, it will cleanse and carry you home. But sometimes there comes a purging fire when the soul begins to look around itself, not at the flame, not at the sorrow, but at everything it once loved in the world, and it no longer clings. This is not coldness, not bitterness, not disgust. It is detachment, quiet, certain, holy. St. Catherine tells us that in this moment, the soul becomes emptied of all attachment to creatures, creatures being everything that is not God, people, possessions, places, even memories that once gave comfort. These things are not hated, but they are no longer needed. The soul, now illuminated by truth, sees how it once depended on things that could never complete it, and with that sight, a gentle loosening begins. The grip on what was familiar is released. The affections it once poured into fleeting, things are slowly drawn back into itself, like light returning to its source. This detachment is not forced. It unfolds, as a flower might close at dusk, not violently, but as a natural return to silence. The soul begins to understand, not in thought, but in essence, that everything it once loved outside of God could never truly satisfy the aching within, and so it lets go, not because it is told to, because it finally sees clearly. St. Catherine paints no image of resentment in this release. The soul is not angry with the world, it simply grows beyond it, like a child who once clung to a toy, but now places it gently aside, not out of disdain, but because it has discovered something deeper. And in that detachment, the soul finds rest, no longer pulled in 1,000 directions, no longer distracted, no longer divided. It becomes whole again, one desire, one gaze, one hunger, and all of it turned toward God. This is not a detachment of despair, it is a purification of love. St. Catherine's words, though written in the language of centuries past, still reach through to those who wrestle now with their own inner attachments, those who fear letting go, who cling to people and pleasures for comfort, yet sense deep down that they are still unsatisfied. She does not tell the soul to tear these things away. She reveals that, in the fire of purgation, they fall away naturally, because in the light of divine love, even the brightest creaturely loves begin to look dim, not because they were evil, but because they were never meant to be the end. She describes the soul's recognition of the distance it created for itself, how much energy it spent on things that seemed essential but were always temporary, the approval of others, the safety of routine, the sweetness of comfort, all these little anchors that tied the soul down, gently, invisibly. And now they dissolve. The soul, stripped bare, is finally free, but not free in the way the world promises. Not the freedom to do or to possess. This is the freedom of being nothing held, nothing withheld, a freedom that breathes. The soul now sees that even good things, friendships, accomplishments, moments of joy, if loved in place of God, or more than God, become obstacles. And so, even the beautiful is surrendered. This surrender is not loss, it is completion. Because the soul is not saying goodbye to love. It is returning to love himself. Imagine the soul, once restless and wandering, finally coming home. Not to a place, not to an idea, but to a love so vast that everything else begins to look small by comparison, not worthless, but insufficient. This detachment is not the death of affection. It is the redirection of affection toward what will never fade. St. Catherine is careful in her language. She does not suggest that the soul becomes numb. On the contrary, it becomes more alive, more tender, more capable of love. But that love is now rightly ordered, freed from dependence, purified of need, and because of this, the soul can now love others without trying to own them, can now admire the world without worshipping it, can now remember its life without regret, without possessiveness, without longing. It loves, but lightly. And this, she writes, is one of the greatest gifts of the fire, because the soul does not just shed sin, it sheds everything that bound it, even unknowingly, to things that could never carry its weight, and in doing so, it becomes weightless. This is not detachment that ends in isolation. It ends in communion. The soul, now emptied of the lesser, becomes capable of receiving the fullness of God. And what once seemed too difficult, release, now seems impossible to return to, because the hunger of the soul has changed. It no longer craves what is soft, what is familiar, what flatters the senses. It craves only presence, only truth, only the face of the one it was, made for. And that, St. Catherine says, is why the soul does not suffer this detachment with grief. It suffers it with gratitude. For now, it is clear, crystal clear. Nothing else matters, nothing else satisfies, nothing else remains. The fire that removes these attachments is not cruel, it is holy. A flame that knows exactly what to touch, what to burn, what to free. And as the soul watches the old idols fall one by one, it does not weep, it marvels. Because with every release, it feels itself rise, lighter, clearer, more whole. There is a paradox here, and Catherine leans into it. The soul, in losing everything, finally possesses everything, because it possesses God. And when the soul has God, not as an idea, not as a memory, but as a living presence, it has enough, more than enough. It has everything. St. Catherine's vision is not one of emptiness. It is one of overflowing, but that abundance can only come when the cup has been emptied. The soul cannot receive while it still clutches, so it lets go, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, but always, always in trust. And here is a truth for those of us still living, still holding on to things tightly, afraid of what might happen if we released our grip. The soul does not die when it detaches. It begins to live, freed from the endless chase, freed from the craving for approval, freed from the fear of loss. It becomes, at last, itself, nothing added, nothing borrowed, just soul, just light, just love. You see, the fire does not take away what makes us human. It restores what makes us holy. And in that restoration, every false attachment is gently, lovingly removed until the soul stands, naked, not in shame, but in glory. Saint Catherine leaves us with this image, the soul, standing in full detachment, no longer pulled by the gravity of created things, rising toward the only love that can contain it, not fleeing the world, but no longer held by it, not rejecting creation, but seeing it for what it is, beautiful, fleeting, a whisper of something greater. And now, the soul no longer chases the whisper. It listens for the voice behind it. That is where it's going. That is what it was made for. And when all else falls away, that voice is all that remains. Now, what happens next, St. Catherine says, is something far more beautiful, far more mysterious. The soul begins to grow, and not in strength, not in knowledge, not in memory. It begins to grow in divine love, like a spark that becomes flame, like a seed that breaks open and reaches for the light. The soul, no longer pulled in 1,000 directions, begins to stretch toward the very thing it was made for. It doesn't happen through effort. It doesn't come from striving. There's no struggle. Love does not grow by force. It grows by surrender. St. Catherine offers no drama, no harsh images, only something profoundly tender, the quiet flowering of love inside a soul that has finally stopped running. The soul, having released all false attachments, now turns entirely toward the divine. And the moment it does, it finds something waiting for it. Something that has never stopped reaching, never stopped calling. God's love, not as idea, not as theology, but as a living fire. And here's the miracle. The more the soul draws near to this fire, the more it longs to be consumed by it. It is not frightened. It does not flee. It moves closer again and again, because this is the only warmth it has ever truly needed, the only light that shows the path forward, the only presence that doesn't fade when the world turns dark. This is not love as the world understands it. It is not sentimental. It is not sweet. It does not come and go. It is absolute. And the soul, touched by it, begins to burn not with pain, but with longing. Not with sorrow, but with clarity. St. Catherine explains that the soul in purgatory is not punished by love. It is purified by it. And as it grows in love, something astonishing begins to happen. It begins to desire the very fire that once caused it suffering. Because now the soul understands. The fire was never meant to harm. It was meant to heal. And the deeper the soul moves into this fire of love, more it changes. It becomes more transparent, more open, more capable of receiving. Everything false begins to fall away. All masks, all pride, all illusions of self-sufficiency, gone. What remains is pure receptivity, a heart that no longer holds back. This is the growth of divine love, Not love that the soul creates, but love that it finally allows in. Because now it's ready. Now there is room. Now the soul understands that to love God is not a matter of knowledge. It is not about having the right words. It is about becoming vulnerable to the touch of eternity. And the more the soul yields, the more love floods in. St. Catherine reveals no grand revelations, no secrets carved in stone, only this: love deepens in silence, it grows in 80. Surrender, it transforms without noise. And this transformation is not dramatic, it is gentle, subtle, like breath entering the lungs, like sunlight warming closed eyes, like a whisper heard, not with the ears, but with the heart. The soul does not try to love more, it simply opens more, because now, for the first time, it knows what it means to be loved. It no longer loves God for fear of punishment, nor for hope of reward. It loves because it cannot do otherwise. It has tasted truth, and nothing else will do. St. Catherine shows that in purgatory the soul's growth is not upward, not outward, it is inward, as though the soul becomes deeper, wider, more expansive within itself. As divine love fills it, the soul's capacity to love increases. And this is the hidden miracle. It never reaches a limit. There is always more to receive, more to become, more to surrender. And through this infinite unfolding, the soul finds peace. Not because the fire has ceased, but because the soul now understands that the fire is love. And love is safe. Love is everything. St. Catherine does not describe punishment. She describes homecoming. The soul, surrounded by divine light, begins to remember what it was made for: not success, not recognition, not comfort, but union. This is not the soul becoming holy by its own effort. This is holiness awakening from within, like a music that's always been playing but was drowned out by the noise of the world. Now, in silence, it rises, and the soul listens, and it weeps not from sorrow, but from the beauty of it, because now it hears the sound it had long forgotten, and it knows, this is what I have always wanted. St. Catherine writes that the soul never asks how long this will take. It does not count the days. It does not measure progress. Time disappears, because when love takes over, nothing else matters. Even the fire, even the ache of longing it becomes joy, because the soul knows, I am moving closer, I am being made ready. And when at last it is ready, when every barrier has fallen, when every shadow has turned to light, the soul will enter, not as a stranger, but as one who has been called by name. There is no fear in this journey, only awe, because love has done what nothing else could do. It has burned away the illusion of distance and revealed the nearness that was always there. This is the growth St. Catherine speaks of, not improvement, not advancement, but unfolding. The soul unfolding into God, not becoming something new, but finally becoming what it always was, a vessel of love, an echo of divine joy, a reflection of perfect beauty. This is not poetry. This is not metaphor. This is what the soul knows in purgatory, not as theory, but as experience. And if this is true after death, then something even more remarkable must be true while we live, that we can begin even now to let go, to open, to love without fear. Because divine love is not waiting on the other side of the veil. It is here, now, calling, whispering, inviting us to surrender the noise, the striving, the distractions, and to step into the fire. The same fire that will someday purify us after death is already reaching for us in life. And we are not alone, because as St. Catherine shows us, divine love does not give up. It waits. And when we finally answer, it floods in. Have you ever felt a quiet, almost unexplainable hum in the silence around you? That deep, subtle sound that only seems to surface when everything else fades away. You might not have known what it was at the time, but there was something about it, something that felt unsettling, like a truth you couldn't quite grasp. That's where the soul finds itself, when it's stripped down to the rawest, most honest moment. Not in chaos, but in a sharp clarity, a knowing that cuts through the noise. And in that stillness, something stirs. Not torment, not punishment, but something much deeper, suffering. This isn't the kind of suffering we're used to hearing about. It's not about a wrathful force or cruelty. It's something that rises from within. It's the pain that comes with the soul, awakening to what it truly is. Have you ever been in a moment where the truth about something, maybe even about yourself, hit you so hard you couldn't deny it? That's what St. Catherine speaks about. She doesn't sugarcoat the pain. She simply lays out the truth. When the soul stands in the light of God's love, it suffers. Not because it's unloved, but because in that light, it finally sees what love really asks of it. The soul's suffering starts when it realizes how far it's wandered from love, not because it wanted to, but because it forgot. It got distracted. It allowed life to pull it away from what truly matters. Remember those times when you felt that nagging emptiness, but you couldn't quite put your finger on it? That was the soul, yearning for something deeper. And now, in this moment, all of those distractions are gone. The busyness, the noise, it's all been stripped away. The soul can no longer hide behind them. It has to face the truth. Imagine walking out of darkness into the brightest sunlight after being in the shadows for so long. The light is beautiful, but it burns. That's what purgation feels like. It's not a punishment, it's just the soul seeing itself as it truly is. And that's a truth that can shake you to your core. This isn't the kind of regret you feel when you've made a mistake. It's not about beating yourself up, it's holy regret. It's the sorrow that comes from seeing what could have been, from recognizing what was lost, and understanding how long you resisted the love that was always there. Do you remember those times when you wished you had done things differently? When you felt that ache for something you couldn't quite reach? That's the soul crying out, not out of despair, but out of longing. St. Catherine doesn't soften the truth. The fire that purges the soul is not something external. It's the burning of divine love, meeting the remnants of our own self. When the soul faces that love, it begins to melt. It hurts, but it's also beautiful. Have you ever felt that kind of pain that cuts through your walls, but instead of pushing it away, you let it in? That's the kind of pain that purifies. Not because we want to escape it, but because we know we need it. We want it. The world tells us to avoid pain, to shy away from suffering. But what if the suffering you're feeling is exactly what you need? It's not cruel. It's not pointless. It's a process that comes from within, from the soul waking up to just how deeply it is loved, and how much it resisted that love. And in this process, there is no condemnation. There is no voice saying, "You're worthless." There's only one voice softly saying, "Come closer." Have you ever felt like you were being called forward, even when it hurt? Even when you didn't know if you could take another step? That's the invitation. The soul moves closer again and again to the fire, because it knows this is the only way to be made ready. St. Catherine says, the more you've resisted love, the more fiercely you feel the fire. But this fire isn't about punishment, it's about closing the distance between you and love. And that can only happen through fire, through awareness, through standing fully in the light of truth, with nothing left to hide behind. But in that fire there is peace, a strange peace, because every flicker of the flame is healing. Every tear, every moment of pain, it's bringing you closer to who you truly are. The soul doesn't cry out, "Let me go." it cries out, "Make me ready." And in that cry, the soul finds its deepest longing, not to escape, but to be pure enough to stand in the full presence of love without flinching. That's the paradox of purgation. The pain is intense, but it is embraced. Not because it's easy, but because it's the only way forward. The soul doesn't try to avoid the pain anymore. It opens to it. And in that openness, something incredible happens. It doesn't become something new. It becomes what it was always meant to be. Every layer of pride, fear, and self-deception falls away. Every shadow is confronted, every wound finally exposed to the light. And in that process, the soul begins to feel lighter. It feels clearer. It's moving more in tune with eternity. Time doesn't matter here. The soul is moving forward, inward, deeper. And though the path is hard, the soul is never alone. God is the flame. God is the light. God is the love that wounds and heals all at once. St. Catherine doesn't promise you a painless journey. She doesn't offer shortcuts, but what she does offer is something much deeper: understanding. And with understanding, peace. She shows us that our deepest suffering isn't rejection. It's an invitation to be undone, to be remade, to be fully real. Remember a sculptor chiseling away at stone? Each strike is painful, but it reveals more of what's beneath. That's what purgation does. It breaks, so it can reveal. It wounds, so it can unveil. And under all of it, the pride, fear, striving, there's the soul as it was always meant to be. Whole, free, alive in love, not in fear, but in wonder. You've felt this, haven't you? That moment when a truth you couldn't face before suddenly became clear. When you felt the sting of conviction, but it also felt like freedom. These moments are sparks of the purifying fire. And if we allow them to work in us now, we won't need to fear what comes after death, because we'll already be walking the path of becoming a path of fire, yes, but more importantly, a path of love. Have you ever felt a kind of ache you couldn't explain? Not pain, exactly, just a soft, haunting feeling that you were meant for something more, like something deep inside you was reaching for a light it had almost forgotten. If you've ever sat in stillness and felt that longing, then you've already glimpsed what St. Catherine of Genoa tried to show us. She didn't write about purgatory with fear or trembling. She didn't try to scare us into believing. She just told the truth, the kind of truth that makes your bones go quiet, because you already knew it deep down. She said purgatory wasn't a prison. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't a courtroom or a holding cell, or a place where God stands far away. It was love. Not the soft, storybook kind, but the kind of love that sees all of you and doesn't turn away. The kind of love that heals by burning away everything that isn't real, gently, painfully, beautifully. She describes something most of us don't talk about. That moment, right after death, when the soul finally stops pretending. No more titles, no more rituals, no more hiding. Just the soul, standing before a love so bright, so familiar, it takes your breath away. And in that light, you remember. You remember who you were before the noise, before the guilt, before the fear. And for a moment, everything inside you aches, not because you're being punished, but because you see, maybe for the first time, how far you still are from that love. But you also see something else. You're moving toward it. That ache, that's not judgment. That's hunger, a holy kind, a longing to be fully known, fully clean, fully home. St. Catherine wrote that purgatory isn't some external torture. The soul isn't forced to suffer. It wants to be purified. It hungers for it, like someone crawling out of the dark who's finally seen the sunrise. Once it's tasted even a sliver of God's light, nothing else will do. And so, the soul begins to shed. It sheds the old masks, the lies it told itself, the ego, the pride, the fear. Slowly, tenderly, sometimes painfully, it lets go. Not because it has to, but because it can't bear not to. And here's the part no one tells us. The pain of purgatory isn't from wrath. It's from love. It's the fire of longing, that unbearable desire to be with God so completely, so fully, that every barrier feels like agony. Not because God is withholding, but because the soul, for the first time, understands what it means to love Him. Maybe you felt a small version of that before. That pull towards something beautiful you didn't feel worthy of. That ache when you knew you weren't ready yet, but still wanted to be. That's the kind of pain St. Catherine talks about. Not fear, not shame, but transformation. That moment when your soul finally stops fighting and starts surrendering. She says the soul doesn't resist this process. It leans into it, like a moth drawn to a flame. Not because it's being forced, but because it can't help it. It wants to be made ready. It wants to burn, not to be destroyed, but to be made light, like the light it loves. Can you imagine that? A soul that would throw itself into 1,000 purgatories just for one more glimpse of God. Not out of terror, but out of love. That's what purgatory is. Not exile, but embrace. It's a place of healing. A sacred in-between, where the soul is already safe, but not yet whole. Where it's moving toward union, step by step, layer by layer, and every moment of that movement is filled with meaning. Yes, there's pain, but it's the pain of waking up, of remembering, of realizing just how deeply you were made to love, and how far you drifted, and how much that love has never left you. St. Catherine said that even in purgatory, the soul is already in a kind of heaven because it's moving toward God, and that movement itself is holy. Maybe that's what we forget sometimes. We think of healing as instant, or perfection as demanded. But what if healing is a journey God walks with us? What if He's not standing at the finish line, waiting for us to be worthy but walking beside us in the fire, holding our hand as we let go of what we never needed? She didn't speak of wrath. She spoke of light. Light that doesn't shame you, but reveals you. Light that doesn't punish, but calls you back. And the soul, your soul, responds. Not because it's terrified, but because it finally sees what it's been longing for all along. Even now, maybe you've felt that longing, in the quiet moments, in the ache behind your distractions, in the tear you didn't know why you cried. That's the memory, the whisper of home. And this journey through purgatory is not linear. There are no shortcuts, no detours, just the slow, beautiful undoing of all the layers that kept us from love. Some souls may let go quickly. Others might take their time. But every soul there is moving, growing, becoming, and every step toward God is filled with grace. We don't always understand our suffering, but what if, just what if, some of it is drawing us closer? What if it's part of the fire that makes us ready? Not because God needs us to be perfect, but because we want to be whole in His presence? In the end, St. Catherine didn't offer us a map. She gave us something better, a mirror, a way to look at our own hearts and realize that even in the pain, even in the unknowing, we are being drawn, not pushed, not punished. Drawn. And the one drawing us, he isn't angry, he isn't distant, he's waiting, he's welcoming, he's love the kind that doesn't flinch at our shadows, because it already sees who we're becoming. When the soul finally lets go, when all that's false has melted, and only truth remains, it doesn't look back in fear. It doesn't ask why it suffered. It just whispers, through tears and fire and joy, I am home. And yet, there comes a time where the soul no longer wrestles. where striving ends, where the storm inside settles, not because it is silenced by force, but because it has finally seen the sun behind the clouds. St. Catherine, in her quiet, unwavering words, leads us there. To that moment when the soul, having journeyed through the veil, having let go of what clung to it in life, undergoes not judgment, not torment, but transformation. St. Catherine writes not as a scholar, nor as a mystic removed from the world, but as one who knows, who has touched the edge of the unseen, and returned with language shaped by love and fire. She speaks of the soul's deep transformation, not sudden, not forced, but unfolding like morning light, gently stretching across the still waters of a lake. And in this unfolding, she reveals something rarely spoken with such clarity, that the soul, when it finally surrenders to the love of God, finds itself made new, no longer defined by what it carried, no longer trapped in the echoes of its past, but reformed, reshaped like gold purified in a flame that does not destroy, but reveals. Here, St. Catherine does not describe purgatory as a place of fear. She sees it as the soul's cleansing bath, a baptism not of water, but of longing. And through this longing, through the ache of knowing how far it still is from perfect union, the soul is refined, yet something shifts. She speaks now of the soul not only in longing, but in peace. A peace unlike anything known on earth. Not the fragile peace that comes and goes with circumstances, but the kind that exists in the very marrow of being. A peace born not from escape, but from full, quiet surrender to the light. What is this transformation she speaks of? It is the soul coming to know itself in God, to see, slowly and without resistance, that its very essence is not separate, not foreign, but rooted in the divine. St. Catherine says that once the soul is stripped of everything that clouded its vision, its pride, its guilt, its attachments, it finally beholds the truth, that it was always meant to reflect the perfection of God, as a clear mirror reflects the light of the sun. This is not a metaphor for her, it is reality, a sacred alchemy of the spirit. The soul no longer looks outward, fearing condemnation. It turns inward and upward, realizing that God's gaze was never wrathful. It was always patient, always waiting. And in that gaze, something extraordinary happens. The soul changes, not by effort, but by presence. Imagine standing before something so radiant, so endlessly good, that it draws out of you everything false, not because you are ashamed, but because you no longer want what is unworthy. The soul's will becomes aligned with God's will. Its desires purified, not by denial, but by deeper longing. And this transformation, St. Catherine tells us, is not the end of the soul's journey, it is the beginning of its true life. The more the soul allows itself to be remade, the more it finds peace. Not because the suffering has ended, but because the soul understands the meaning of it. Pain is no longer punishment, it is purpose. It is the gentle chisel shaping the marble into something eternal. And here lies the core of her vision. Transformation is peace. Because peace, in the soul, is not the absence of difficulty. It is harmony with the divine. It is trust, deep and total, that all is being made right, not through force, but through love. She describes the soul as beginning to taste God. A curious phrase, simple, but arresting. To taste God. Not in fullness yet, not in overwhelming ecstasy, but in quiet glimpses. Like a traveller nearing home, smelling the familiar warmth of bread through the doorway. The soul knows it is close. And this nearness brings joy that no earthly pleasure could echo. Even in the fire of purgation, the soul is held. And in this holding, it finds peace. No longer afraid of what is being taken from it, the soul begins to rejoice in what is being given. It sees the old desires falling away, like autumn leaves released by wind, and it does not mourn them. For what remains is clarity. St. Catherine explains that the soul, when it reaches this stage, no longer clings to the self it once was. Its very identity becomes reshaped by divine presence. And this reshaping is not loss, it is fulfillment. The soul becomes lighter, freer. And as it draws closer to the source of all love, it does not resist. It rests. Peace, she writes, is the natural condition of a soul aligned with its maker. Not an achievement, but a return, a remembering. One does not have to have read theology or understood ancient rituals to feel the truth of these words. They settle in the heart, like a warm cup in the hands. Because all of us, in some quiet place inside, long for this kind of peace. The kind that says, you are known, you are not abandoned, you are being made whole. In St. Catherine's vision, there is no war between the soul and God, only a drawing near, and the shedding of what cannot survive the light. And in the silence that follows, when the soul has stopped asking, stopped proving, stopped grasping, there is only peace, not as a reward, as a birthright, a return to what always was. Saint Catherine reveals the sacred hush after the fire, the calm after transformation, the stillness of a soul that no longer struggles to become, because it finally is. Can you picture it? A soul once heavy with wounds, now light as wind, once full of shadows, now transparent like clear water. And in that transparency, God shines through, not as something distant, but as the very breath of the soul itself. St. Catherine never dramatizes this. She does not need to. Her vision is quiet, steady, true, like the beat of a steady heart, or the rhythm of waves smoothing the shore. And so, we are left not with thunder, but with stillness. The soul rests in God, not as a guest in a stranger's home, but as one returning to its own. Every suffering transformed into understanding, every longing fulfilled by presence, every fear dissolved in light. This is the peace St. Catherine reveals, not peace that depends on circumstance, but the kind that endures beyond death, because it is born of union. In the end, the soul says nothing. It only abides in light, in love, in God. What if all the pain, all the waiting, all the letting go was never a sign of failure, but of becoming? And what if, just beyond the veil, peace is not something to earn, but something waiting to embrace you? There are loves that flicker, soft moments that keep us warm for a time. But then there's a kind that marks you forever, that burns through every assumption, every safe thought you've built your life around. And then there's something else, a kind of love that doesn't knock or ask or plead. It crashes through, and once it touches you, even for a second, you can't go back. Have you ever felt it? That strange pull, not from a person, not even from emotion, but something deeper. A warmth that starts in your chest, and for a moment, everything feels clearer. Like something just beneath the surface of your life is trying to break through. That's what St. Catherine was trying to name. Not a philosophy, not theology, but an encounter. When she talked about purgatory, she didn't mean punishment. Forget the old images, flames licking at feet, chains clinking in some dark chamber. That wasn't her vision. She saw something tender, fierce, but tender. She saw a transformation lit from within, a love so deep, so unrelenting, that it burns away everything that doesn't belong, not to shame the soul, but to free it. And here's the wild part. The fire is love. Not like love, not symbolic. It is love. The love that spoke the galaxies into being. The love that wept, bled, broke open for us. The love that doesn't flinch at your mess. That meets you in your silence, in your stubbornness, in your fear, and doesn't walk away. You might brace at the idea of pain, but this pain isn't punishment. It's the ache you feel when you realize you've outgrown the life you were living. The quiet yearning for something more, something deeper than applause, deeper than comfort. That soft voice inside that says, there has to be more than this. Catherine wrote about souls in this fire, each one letting go of what held them back. But it wasn't a ladder. There were no rungs to climb, no race to win. Some souls surrendered in an instant, like water poured into flame. Others took their time, inch by inch, breath by breath, but all of them were being drawn, not forced, pulled by a love that knew their name. And that's what makes it personal. This fire isn't generic. It doesn't burn blindly. It knows you. It knows the hidden parts, the ones you tucked away because you didn't think they were lovable. It knows the version of you that tried too hard and still felt like too little. And it says, even that part, yes, especially that part. Have you ever looked back and thought, I was surviving, but I wasn't really alive? That's the space Catherine describes. A soul loosening its grip on old identities, old fears, old stories, and in their place, a hunger to be seen, to be held, to be loved. Not for who you pretended to be, but for who you really are, even if you're still figuring that out. And the way forward? You let the fire in. You let it reach the places you've guarded, the guilt you carried for too long, the dreams you abandoned, the voice in your head that told you weren't enough. You don't fight it. You don't run. You just let yourself be found. It's not easy. It costs something. Real change always does. It costs the illusions, the masks, the defenses, the quiet deals you made to stay small. But what you get in return, it's weightless. It's holy. It's home. Some souls fly, others crawl, but every one of them is invited. None are forgotten. There's no scorecard, no ticking clock, just this burning, beautiful motion toward wholeness. Each step deeper into the fire reveals more of what's possible, not in some distant heaven, but in the very center of your being. And that ache you've carried, that restless tug, it's not failure, it's not punishment. It's proof that your soul still hopes, still longs, still believes there's something worth reaching for. Catherine calls it divine longing, a yearning so fierce that even distance hurts. The fire doesn't create that longing. It exposes it. It turns it into light. Not to torment you, but to show you what's always been waiting, that what you've been aching for is already aching for you. This isn't about earning your way to heaven. Catherine never uses that language. She doesn't speak in bargains or checklists. She speaks in surrender, in transformation, in becoming. And what she saw, what she knew, is that divine love doesn't just accept you. It pursues you. It reshapes you. It burns everything that isn't real, and in its place leaves something unshakable. The degrees she writes about aren't rules, they're music, layers of harmony. Each soul, a note in the song of creation, becoming whole again. The more you surrender, the more clearly you hear the melody, not just in heaven, but in yourself. So, no, purgatory isn't exile. It isn't a waiting room or punishment. It's a sacred place. A fire that doesn't consume, but reveals. Where everything you feared might disqualify you is met with eyes that say, I see all of it, and I still want you. And in that place, every question you carried, every silence that haunted you, every version of you that didn't get to be seen, they rise. They become fuel. They become light. St. Catherine gives us this vision, not to scare us, but to invite us, to remind us that even in the in-between, even in the pain of becoming, love is working. And it is not done. Because love, real love, doesn't just forgive. It transforms. It gathers every shattered piece and says, "This still belongs." And in the end, as Catherine tells us, the fire whispers just one thing: you were always meant to burn, not in punishment, but in glory, not to disappear, but to finally be seen. But there is a silence the soul waits for, not the silence of absence, but of completion, not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness that comes when every longing has found its end. Saint Catherine draws back the veil to reveal what lies beyond the fire, beyond the purifying ache, beyond the slow surrender. She speaks of the soul's final union with God and the profound, unshakable repose it finds there. This is not theory for her, it is vision, experience, a whisper caught from the edge of eternity, and spoken humbly to those still here, still searching. Here, the fire is no longer needed. The soul has passed through purification. All shadows are gone. It holds no memory of self separate from the divine. And in that place, beyond time, beyond separation, it enters into perfect rest, not as sleep, not as stillness in death, but as a fullness so complete, nothing more is needed. She describes this final repose not as an achievement, but as a returning, a homecoming. The soul doesn't conquer its way there, it yields completely, and in that yielding, it finds what it was made for. She says, when the soul has reached the end of its purification and is ready for God, it no longer feels pain, not because it is distracted or comforted, but because it has been entirely consumed by divine love. There is no more purgation to bear, no more longing that aches, only a still flame, alive, bright, and whole. The soul no longer even remembers its own journey. It no longer considers its past, its former wounds, or even its growth. It has moved beyond all reflection, because it sees only God. And in seeing God, it rests. She says the soul, in this final union, does not even desire, because there is nothing left to desire. There is no distance to cross, no veil to pierce, no self to pierce, protect. The soul is absorbed not in the sense of being erased, but in being fulfilled. It is not destroyed, it is known entirely and loves with the fullness it was always meant to give. This reposing God, St. Catherine tells us, is not passive. It is not the soul drifting off into some serene oblivion. It is alive, blinding in its peace, rich in a joy that doesn't rise or fall, but simply is. She dares to say something few mystics have said with such clarity, that in this final moment the soul becomes one with divine will, not like a servant obeying a master, but like flame merging with flame. No resistance, no duality, only love, perfectly returned. The soul is not waiting for anything else to come. It is not striving. It is not measuring. It simply rests. And this rest is not the end of activity. It is the beginning of unending life, not in the form we understand with hours and labours, but as a constant exchange of being between soul and God, a communion that never breaks. It's as if St. Catherine saw into a kind of peace that words can only point toward, but never fully grasp. Yet she tries. She writes of a soul that is so full of God, it becomes radiant with His presence, not by its own doing, but because love has emptied it of all else. The soul is no longer a mirror trying to reflect the divine. It is light itself, one with the Bose and Berry Ente, source. And this union, she insists, is not reserved for a few saints, or the worthy, or the elite. It is what every soul was made for. It is what the fire of purification leads to, what all ache and hunger and surrender prepare us for. A love that asks for everything, not to take it away, but to give itself in return. No soul, St. Catherine says, would ever choose to rush through this process, because in each degree of purgation, the soul is made ready for the intensity of this union. If it arrived too soon, it would not know how to remain. But once it is ready, once all that is not love has fallen away, there is nothing left but God, and the soul, in that moment, wants nothing else. Imagine that. A being that no longer longs, no longer fears, no longer wonders what will come next, because what has come is everything. There's a moment when St. Catherine, quietly, speaks of the soul's inability to turn back, not because it's forced forward, but because it is irresistibly drawn. The light is too bright, the joy too vast, the welcome too complete. The soul has no thought of return. It goes forward without hesitation, and in going forward, it finds rest, repose, a word that means more than sleep, more than stillness. It means being held, secure, unshaken, at home. And this, she says, is the final truth, that the soul, having passed through all sorrow and fire, no longer sees the flame or the pain or even itself. It sees only God. And in that seeing, it becomes what it sees, no longer a creature gazing upward, but a being finally aligned with its Creator, not beside him, not below him, with him, united not in function, but in love. Saint Catherine ends here, not with a vision of angels or choirs, not with a catalogue of rewards. She ends with stillness, with the soft, deep rest of a soul that no longer remembers it was ever far away. St. Catherine doesn't stir you to action. She invites you to let go, to stop striving, to stop fearing, to remember that what you long for is not beyond you, it's ahead of you. And every ache, every silence, every unknown step is part of the path. The soul is not abandoned, not in pain, not in waiting. It is led with tenderness to the place it has always belonged. And when it arrives, there is no fanfare, no grand moment, just this: the soul rests, because it is home. Now, we realize there's a truth that echoes through the silence. The soul's journey is a return to the divine. We encounter not a conclusion, but a profound fulfillment. St. Catherine offers us something subtle, yet powerful, an understanding of what happens when the soul has passed through purification, when all the struggles and the challenges, the pain and the longing have found their resolution. St. Catherine doesn't hold the imagery of grand triumphs or earth-shattering moments. It does not call us to heroic feats or feats of greatness. What it presents is quiet, profound, and deeply moving the soul's final journey to eternal peace. The soul has passed through the refining fire. It has been made pure, and now it reaches the ultimate goal: union with God, eternal repose in His love. It's a return to the place it always sought, the place it has always belonged, not in a faraway realm or distant future, but in the depths of the now. St. Catherine writes with incredible humility, urging us to recognize that this journey of the soul is not about transcendence, but about return. The soul is not climbing towards something that was never within reach. It is returning to the source, the very place it was created from, the place where it can finally rest, at peace with all that it has become. But, she says, in the quiet peace that follows, the soul is not passive. It does not simply cease to exist in some passive slumber. This rest is active. This peace is full of life, a life that radiates from the very presence of God. The soul does not lie dormant. It blossoms. It becomes more fully itself than ever before. And in that becoming, it comes into the fullness of the divine, existing as it was always meant to be, not lacking, not wanting, but whole. This is where the soul reaches its greatest peace, not in solitude or in silence that numbs, but in the complete unity with God. St. Catherine speaks of how this ultimate union doesn't require striving or sacrifice, but a complete surrender, a surrender that frees the soul and makes it whole. It is not a union to be feared or doubted, but to be embraced. She describes it as a natural return, a return to divine. Is love so profound, so complete, that all separation dissolves? The soul feels as though it has always been there, always belonged there. It is reunited with the source in the purest form, love. This reunion is not just a final act, it is the very essence of the soul's existence. The soul was always moving toward this state. It was always searching for this peace, this fulfillment, and now it finds it. For many, these words might stir fear or even confusion. The notion of being absorbed entirely into something greater than ourselves can feel distant, even frightening. But St. Catherine's words are a balm for that fear. She speaks of it not as something to fear, but as a deeply natural and liberating union in this place. St. Catherine tells us, the soul is at rest because it no longer seeks, it no longer wants, it is complete. The soul's peace doesn't come from being free of life's burdens, but from the ultimate knowledge that it is whole, that it is enough, that it is held in the arms of God. As we ponder these truths, we are invited to stop and reflect. What do we long for? Do we not all crave? Peace. Real peace. Peace that comes not from avoidance, but from union, from the ultimate harmony with the divine. St. Catherine tells us that the soul, when it rests in God, does not merely experience the peace we understand from moments of rest or tranquility. It experiences a complete peace, a peace that surpasses all understanding, a peace that cannot be shaken, a peace that is not temporary, but eternal. In this final union, the soul does not lose its identity. Instead, it finds its truest identity. It becomes one with the divine, not absorbed into it like a drop of water lost in the ocean, but as a flame merging with the eternal light, shining brightly in the way it was always meant to. But the beauty of this final peace, St. Catherine tells us, is that it is never stagnant. The soul may no longer struggle. It may no longer feel the separation between itself and the divine. But this doesn't mean it ceases to grow. Even in rest, the soul continues to deepen in its love, its joy, and its awareness of God's presence. This rest is not an end to existence, but an entry into a fullness of being. The soul becomes more fully what it is meant to be. St. Catherine closes with an invitation to each of us, still walking the path of purification. She reminds us that the very longing we feel, our hunger for peace, our search for love, our deepest unspoken ache, is a sign of our own soul's journey. Every desire we feel is a sign that we are moving toward this reunion. Every trial, every challenge, every longing is part of the plekti, process of becoming. But, she says, we are never far from this ultimate peace. Though we walk through many challenges, though we endure the purging fires of our lives, we are always moving toward the union that will come. This process does not strip us of our essence, but refines us, preparing us to receive the greatest gift we could ever imagine. As we listen to her words, let us carry them within us, not as distant, abstract concepts, but as living truths. The soul's rest is not a distant future. It is a reality that lies before us, waiting for us. It is the destiny of every soul to be reunited with the divine in peace, and to dwell forever in the divine in peace. Love that has always been present. She speaks to us not as distant observers, but as companions on the journey. She assures us that we are held, that we are seen, that we are loved. Whatever struggles, whatever fears, whatever questions we carol at them be placed in the hands of God, who awaits us with open arms